what I'm seeing happen with sleep monitors and glucose monitors and whatnot is it can be, and it can end up being just another tool to shame people because I can look at my sleep score every day and say like, yeah, that one still sucks. I know I didn't sleep well last night. This thing told me I definitely didn't sleep well last night. And yet there's not a whole, back to what are we doing Monday? How do you actually get into the mode of action forming and kind of tiny habits and working your way towards something productive? And whether it's an American thing or just a human thing, we really struggle with that feeling like it doesn't matter that much that I slept 10 more minutes last night. But that sort of mindset of accumulation of marginal gains is so big. That's such a huge insight. If you can just get these tiny things going.
You're listening to Choose the Hard Way with Andrew Vance. My guests share stories about how doing hard things builds stronger humans. If you're new to the show, I've spent more than 25 years telling and shaping the stories of the world's top performers, brands, and businesses. I've been the head of content at the human performance company TRX, where I helped the company become an iconic and instantly recognizable brand around the globe. I've been a communications executive at the social network for athletes, Strava, where I helped the business reach profitability and help build a community of more than 100 million athletes. And I spent the first decade of my career as a journalist, writing for outlets like Rolling Stone, Outside Magazine, the Los Angeles Times, and more. Today, I advise and consult with businesses and nonprofits to develop high-impact content and communication strategies, and I coach leaders who are ready to become high-performance communicators. If you'd like to work with me, you can DM me at HardwayPod or reach out to choosethehardway@gmail.com. I'm also now considering sponsorships from mission-aligned brands to support the show in 2023 and beyond. If that's you, please reach out. We're revamping the newsletter, so be sure to sign up at choosethehardway.com to get a monthly drop of insights from recent episodes. I've been putting a lot of love into bringing you this show since 2018. Please do my guests a favor and rate Choose the Hard Way 5 stars wherever you listen, and share this episode with a friend who enjoys doing hard things. Chris Waugh is a powerhouse in the world of healthcare innovation. As Sutter Health's first Chief Innovation Officer, Chris applies his extensive experience in human-centered design to guide the integrated network's innovation strategy. This work is driven by the idea that healthcare should fit into the patient's life and not the other way around. Chris is also passionate about taking on mental health issues and driving simpler, easier to navigate, and more resonant healthcare for all patients. Before joining Sutter Health, Chris held entrepreneurial leadership roles at the design and innovation juggernaut IDEO, and he was vice president of design at One Medical Group in San Francisco, where he helped create a culture of innovation. A graduate of Fort Lewis College in Colorado, Chris is an affiliated member of both Rock Health and Innovation 50. This episode is part of the Choose the Hard Way Life Cycles series that explores how bikes shape people and the world. We talk about innovation, healthcare, marginal gains, cellular health, systems thinking, the power of curiosity, and the many ways cycling has been a vector for personal and professional growth and exploration for Chris. You can follow Chris on LinkedIn. Find that link in the show notes. I've known you for a while, but I don't know how you ended up in California. How did you end up in California?
You'll appreciate this, I think. So I was racing mountain bikes. I'd graduated from college in Durango, Colorado, and was racing mountain bikes and got a sponsorship, which meant for a few select races, they would allow me to like pile in the back of this bus and then pay for the race. And so I thought I had arrived.
Were you a professional athlete?
Well, I don't know. I think professional is the moment where money starts changing hands, which means you actually, or income comes towards you, which never actually happened. And so no, I don't think I was. I was an expert. There was no semi-pro at that stage. You were expert, and then you could turn pro. And I was doing all right. I was getting top tens in a couple expert races, so I could taste it. but there was no money coming in. So my accounting father said, this is not a job. And he was right. He was right. And so I was interviewing in between the races. So I'd come out to California to do Mammoth and um, races in Tahoe and stuff like that. And so that was the Norva National Series back then. And so coincidentally, stopped by and had an interview at Specialized Bikes and met a good friend named Adam. We're still friends now, and the rest was history. Kind of moved into somebody's room in San Jose and started California life.
What did you do at Specialized?
My first job was in sales, and I did not like the job. We we were in inside sales, so we would basically enter orders and call bike shops and like beg them, to take more stuff. It was okay. I mean, there were some funny moments for sure, but the thing that Specialized is pretty famous for is it closes every day at noon, and there's a lunch ride, and so I would just take out all my frustration on the lunch ride, and I guess at the time that's kind of how you got noticed, and so next thing I knew, I got what we called the call up, which meant you got called from the first floor to the second floor, and I had some skill there, so I'm being a little flippant, but there was some potential I think in me that Mike Sinyard saw and joined the global marketing crew, and the next thing you know, we were working on products, and everything that wasn't a bike was part of my remit is product development for equipment, and then working on the marketing team for accessories. So then we were thrown all over the world. I mean, it was awesome for a 20 something kid to go to Corsica and Italy, and we got these calls for the top riders, and of course they couldn't go to these tier 2 races. So it'd be like you and me. It'd be like, well, we'll just send Andrew and Chris instead as sort of brand representatives. And that was awesome. It was like we were living the life without having to train as hard. And I didn't have the talent or the weight profile or whatnot to be that good. So it was a cool way to live the life.
What was your ambition as a human being at that point in your life? What did you think you wanted to do?
You and I were probably really similar at that stage. It was all about outdoor experiences. Colorado was skiing, and when the mountain bike thing hit, I mean, that really just resonated with me for some reason. I grew up as a BMX kid, and so my dad would drive me around just constantly to all these races, and I loved it. And when I think back of it, it's like, talk about a committed dad. Like, he'd drive me to Oklahoma from Colorado Springs each year, and I choked that race every year, and he would do it again the next year, and we'd have Thanksgiving. Ironically, it's Thanksgiving tomorrow, but we'd be driving right now, and we'd stop at a truck stop for Thanksgiving dinner, and then go to the Grand Nationals, and I would choke, and then we'd drive back. So that's what kind of got me into that. But yeah, so that was the beginning of that. Just sort of learning. I was running too. I was running cross country in high school, and this friend of my dad said, "Hey, we're doing the world's toughest triathlon in Tahoe. Does your kid want to do the run portion?" And I didn't know this person very well, but I had 1 month to train for this thing. So we flew into Tahoe, and I was young and dumb, and so it's like, wait, California, this looks a lot like Colorado. Like, what? I thought I was ready for like a true California experience, and I felt kind of ripped off that Tahoe was so like Colorado. And turns out the racer passed out on the bike and didn't finish, DNF'd on the bike, and was stable enough in the med tent that they let me run anyways. They just sort of let me go out and do the course, and I loved it. I thought it was cool. It was like the longest run I'd ever done in Tahoe, and I just think that's when the endurance bug hit. It was like, this is cool. I like seeing how far you could go, and people have taken that way too far. But just for me, that really resonated. That sort of process of just testing yourself and seeing how far you could go.
How many times did you end up doing Leadville?
I think 6. Yeah, 6. I was thinking about that this morning. I woke up thinking about that because I thought you might ask me about it. And The Leadville 100, what's not well known is it's actually 103 miles. And when you get to 100, you're just pissed because it's the Leadville 100 and that should be the end. And the last 3 miles, you turn and it's a climb out and it's brutal. You're so done at that point. And you can hear the finish, which that's when things get exciting, but you're still climbing, climbing, climbing. So I think it needs to be renamed the Leadville 103. But as you know, I think that race starts at 10,000 feet. So coming up from sea level and showing up at 10,000 feet is no joke. And I'm always cramming too many things in. One time we got pulled over on the way to the start line at Leadville, and it took some time. The policeman kind of took his time and gave us a warning. And by the time we were back on the road, we were late and missed the exit for Leadville. And the next exit, if people know Colorado, if you don't exit at Copper Mountain, you got to go to the top of Vail Pass to turn around. It's a good 20-minute diversion at minimum. So we rolled into Leadville. I started putting my clothes on in the car, rolled into Leadville, jumped over the fence, and the gun went off, and we were off. I think it took a good hour for my heart rate to go down. But Leadville's a great event. It's awesome, and it's hard, and good community, and really kind of saved that town, which is a really cool story behind the Leadville event.
Chris, I really feel like I'd be doing a disservice to my listeners if we glossed over the intensity and difficulty of this event. And specifically, I'm wondering, with events like Leadville and your various other endurance sports endeavors, what do you say to yourself during moments in those races when it feels terrible and you maybe don't feel like this is what you'd like to be spending your time doing? Do you ever get to that point mentally when you're racing, or do you always feel like, this is pretty good?
Yeah, absolutely. You and I talked a little bit about when we were just having a chat before this, is why would anyone do this? And I think it's to me, there's the pre, the during, and then the post. And a lot of people talk about the during, and I want to answer your question on the during. But the pre and the post, let's come back to that, because I think that's where a lot of the actual rewards are in the experience. But the during, what goes on to my head is it's a great book a friend of mine recommended that really resonates, and it speaks to what happens in your head. It's called The Gap and the Gain. So the gap means that there's this ideal thing you expected and it's not happening. So you're just kind of ruminating on that. So if you're in the gap, you're like, the start wasn't what I wanted it to be, and I don't feel right, or my heart rate's not right, or I didn't sleep well last night. So that you're in the gap. The gain is just taking an inventory on a lot of shit might have happened. I remember Leadville, I got a flat tire in like the first 11 miles, and I couldn't get it fixed. Like, it was just way slower than it should have been. That's for people that don't do mountain bike races. Like, a flat tire is not the end of the world. You can fix it, but it took forever to get this thing fixed. And so by the time I was back on, it was, a lot of people would have been just like, game over. But then you got to change it. Like, you got to adjust that day. And so the gains were, well, it's not raining. Like, there's other things you can take inventory on that can keep you going. And the self-talk is interesting, because during my regular life, my self-talk isn't as positive as it is during those events. So it's like, I was telling myself, it's awesome to be in Leadville. It's awesome to be back in Colorado. It's a nice day, all this training that led up to this. This is great. But there were certainly time checks that, if you don't hit these time checks, you're not going to get the big buckle, which is like this, we clobber ourselves to get this big buckle. And so I tell myself often, just like encouraging myself as if I were talking to you and watching you. It's like, Andrew, great job. Nice work. Like, trying to find something that went right and amplifying the thing that's going right. And also counting. I just count the spins of the foot, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, do the other side. And it's very meditative, but it keeps you like focused on what you can control, which is like the next 10 pedal strokes. You can't control what's going to happen in an hour. So just kind of getting back into that zone. When you're not feeling well, that's hard. So you're just trying to kind of work through and just know that that will pass. The other thing I try to do, and this sometimes this backfires, is I try to take inventory, think back to like a time when it was even harder than this. So a story I'll often refer back to is the Durango to Silverton road race would happen every Memorial Day, and you'd race the train, which wasn't that hard. You'd always beat the train. But one year in that race, it started snowing, and it was like the whole race fell apart. People just abandoned their bikes and started huddling, like shivering together to try to stay warm. And then if you were lucky, a bus came by to like swoop you up. But I finished that race and it was freezing and cold and hard. And of a lot of races, it's never been that hard. So you can always kind of think back, like, I can think of a time when it was harder than this. But in Leadville, you start drawing blanks on, yeah, no, I can't think of a time it's ever been any harder than this. And then once you're in that zone, you're like, oh shit, this is like all new territory. But then I think you'll see like people like David Goggins and others you listen to is like, that's when you surprise yourself. It's like you find something else. And that's part of the encouraging part. It's like you go further than you ever thought you could. And that's when things get really interesting. But once you've done some really hard things, and that gets harder and harder and harder, and I think people get kind of drawn to that. It's like, oh, could I make it even harder than the last time? But I think the other thing is camaraderie. You can make a lot of friends out there, and I think people underestimate that, and it's a strategic tool. So if I'm riding next to you and you're hurting too, and I strike a conversation, we're both distracted now, you know? So I think people underestimate the camaraderie. I met like a Formula One driver that was out doing that race one year, and some famous drummer, I think he was Rage Against the Machine drummer or something, did that race. And just, you strike up these conversations. Those are interesting people that are out there choosing to do that crazy event. So that's powerful because if you get in your own head too much, you're in trouble.
So I think what we've established here in the first almost 20 minutes is that during your sporting career, you more or less have been an elite world-class athlete. So I want to go to October 2013 when I was on a race course with you, and you were slightly ahead of me. I don't really have the same athletic pedigree as you, and
that's not true.
I don't know what was happening. Maybe you could describe it, Chris, but I could only describe what you did as violently turning your bike into me and trying to dislocate me from my machine and push me off the course. So can you talk a bit about the camaraderie of that technique and what was going through your head at that moment in time?
Yeah, we can sum that up as a T-bone. So so that was the T-bone. And all bets are off, Lance. Once the gun goes off, I don't care how well we know each other's families. Like it's game on. So I think what had happened was you were beating me, and I wasn't very happy about that. So I'll admit it, I went below the line, taking out techniques. I don't think I intentionally like went on for the full T-bone, but it just sort of happened. And then I think it gave us years of material and heckling afterwards. So it was well worth it for the material, and hopefully there weren't any permanent injuries.
No permanent injuries. It was fair. It was fair play in my view. That's just part of being on the field of play. So to pivot a little bit.
If I remember, wait, hang on. We don't pivot that for a second. I'm trying to remember the podium. So how did that race finish? I was trying to remember how that ended up.
I'm drawing a blank. I know I beat another friend of ours, but what? How did you see it? Do you recall where we landed?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I think the part of me that has a moral compass likes to remember that you won, but it may in fact be that the T-bone worked and I came in one podium spot ahead of you. But I think so. I think one of us won like 40 pounds worth of Cliff Bars or something like that. You probably still have a few of those in that closet behind you.
I think I'm still suffering from constipation from those Clif Bars. But yeah, I think you may have made it on the podium. I made it on the California podium. If you're not familiar with that and you're listening, that means that you actually are not on the podium, but you're standing next to it. That's called a California podium. But I want to go in a slightly different direction here. So we've talked about bikes a lot. What was your first exposure to design thinking?
Yeah, so at there was the first exposure you had that you didn't know you were experiencing it, and then you learned later that there's a whole religion around it. And so my first exposure to experiencing it was I signed up um, through Specialized to do the AIDS ride from San Francisco to California, and a girlfriend at the time, we did that together, and it was profound. It was awesome, and I documented the experience through a video camera, and I would talk to anybody that would talk to us, and just sort of absorbed it all. And the takeaway from that was that Specialized at the time, it was obsessed about the bicycle plus competition. That was the formula. It's like innovate or die, make the lightest product so that people can go the fastest, and everyone must think that the Tour de France is like a noble achievement and would want to do that if they could. And I came back off the AIDS ride and showed this documentary around Specialized, and it was like, this is bicycle plus community equals transformation. And just watching how the bicycle was the mechanism to create, shared camaraderie, shared suffering around what everyone had been through, and possibility. The fundraise around that event was pretty substantial and still is. And the mayor did it of San Francisco, and all that stuff. So that was experiencing design research through ethnography and empathy, like literally being in the person's shoes of people that were going through this and experiencing for a week living in it. And so then the next phase of design thinking would be, what are the insights gathered off of that? And then how does that ignite really creative thinking about, well, what else can we do with a bicycle to create community? So that was the first time I felt like I'd experienced it intuitively. When I found IDEO, it was like, oh, there are steps to this, and a discipline to this, and a timeline to this that are well understood. So it was like a bomb had gone off for me. That was like, wow, people could study this. Like, there's schools for this. Why didn't anybody tell me about that? And nowadays that's almost laughable, but you have to remember this was like early 2000s, and design thinking wasn't even a term yet. So there were certainly schools like the D School, and schools now that are world famous, like RISD, where the Airbnb Joe came out of, and that team came out of, is just Brian Chesky and that whole scene. There's just like this iconic wave of it now. But that was IDEO was the time that I learned that this is a repeatable process. At Specialized, it was kind of coincidental. And then once you learn the repeatable process, it was once you learned you could apply that in anything, including your own life. It was so cool. I started running these like workshops for friends around like their career choices, and like having all their buddies over, and they all told stories about the person, and we brainstormed possibilities, and it was cool to have that tool, and still is. In your back pocket. And now you see that whole industries get transformed that way. Like when One Medical rang the NASDAQ bell and said, we're a human-centered design primary care service, it was like, wow, they're literally putting it in their identity. Like, this is how we did. They're giving it the credit to say, this is how we transformed healthcare, was using human-centered design. So super cool.
How did you make these jumps from, we talked a lot about bikes. You were at Specialized, you end up at IDEO, then One Medical, then Sutter. How did you make these jumps? Like, what happened? What was going on in your life professionally? What about your curiosity drew you in these different directions?
Yeah, Specialized, I think that the tough ending with Specialized is that I realized I was way more into the humans and what they were doing, and less about the bicycle products themselves. Like, I didn't care that much that this year's product was like 4 ounces lighter than last year's, because I was seeing people like this guy, Ricky, who does Leadville every year on like a 1980s Manitou shock. It's like, he's fine. He beats most people, right? It's like, it's the bike's important, but really, is it, So as long as it doesn't break on you, right? So coming to that realization, I think that was a tough reality for both Specialized and me. Is like I had my ambitions were more on the people, which that's what started to draw me to something else. And then the leap, there's a bicycle involved in all this. You know, it was no coincidence that the studio head of where I worked was really into cycling. You know, I'm sure that right or wrong, like put me on his radar and some of the candidates. But talk about imposter syndrome. He rolled up this file cabinet. I was there to help him run the studio at IDEO. Getting this job at IDEO, like people wanted that job so bad, and the fact that I got in there is still a bit of a miracle. But he rolls up this file cabinet, and in it are the resumes of the people that had applied for this job, and it was like Harvard, Stanford, Stanford, etc. It's like you guys have made a huge mistake, was what I was thinking, and maybe they thought that too for a little while, but but came around. And then for me at that time at IDEO was making physical products. So at that time it was this boomerang, which was like, wait, we could apply this to food, non-tangible objects, services. So there was a new wave of us that were just expanding where design thinking could be applied, and that was the breakthrough. And I think at that point, IDEO it's got a good return on its investment in me, and I was like unleashed. It was awesome.
Where did you find yourself flourishing within IDEO's practice? And how did you think in this expansive manner into these other spaces?
So the first was just learning like what was the process, and then frankly, and even to this day, like gaining the confidence that I think design suffers this huge fatal error, which is those that design are reserved for those that have studied the craft and discipline of design, which is not true. I think that's true for deep focused areas like UX design or industrial design. However, I would look to you and I would say, you're an impact designer. You are creating impact through your podcast. You're creating impact through your writing. You're creating impact through your family. Like you're an impact designer. So the fact that we kind of leave this word design as if it's like this exclusive group of people, I think is doing society a disservice because there's so many people who are in the practice of design, but they wouldn't ever tell themselves that. And therefore they might call themselves something else. But I think if you can get behind the momentum of the craft of design, it's a great lift. You know, it gives you the confidence to keep going. That the book Creative Confidence kind of really dives into this. So that's that. The practice was we started the food and beverage practice, which was using design to think about food experiences. We started a practice there called Active Health, which was helping. Cool project there was like helping Nike create more active populations, really studying where do people learn physical movement, and like the age of 8 was really interesting, where people would either do something athletic or not, and then run that record in the head for the rest of their lives. They were either athletic or not athletic from 8 years old for the rest of their lives. So there's like these key moments we could design for, like that one. So, so yeah, active health and food were the two practices that resonated the most with me. And then we did points of view. A good friend of mine, Neil Grimmer, we studied wellness and behavior change and how you design for behavior change. And now you can start to see where this goes. It's like what healthcare, you're your own doctor 99% of the time. And healthcare's biggest challenge is behavior change. That's its number one challenge. So it doesn't take long to get in to say, wow, design thinking could be powerful when applied to healthcare.
What happens when someone is 8?
When someone's 8, there's some sort of athletic challenge, right? So like you go out to the field day or the ropes come out, and you're either naturally good at that or you're not, and the crowd celebrates you or they don't. And so that's criticism. You see the same thing in art. Art is exactly the same thing. All kids, I'm sure yours included, are little artists. That's just what they do. They sketch, they draw. And it helps me. The one piece of art that adults hang on to is the alphabet. The alphabet is like it's sketching. You've mastered the sketch. But the problem with adults who will raise their hand and say they're artists are usually professional or they're really good. But kids, there haven't been their own self-critic hasn't arrived yet. But around the age of 8 is where some of this stuff starts to form, where you start to beat yourself up, like this piece of art sucks, or I'm not I'm not a good runner. And I don't know about you, but athletically, I was a super late bloomer. I wasn't some sort of spectacular soccer kid, or I didn't make the football team. All that stuff was not for me. But there was something about running and BMX and that sort of endurance stuff that was like, wow, this is cool. Wasn't popular, but it was, it resonated with me. So yeah, that's what happens at 8. And it's I'd call that a phase. It's really like, that 8 to 12 formation around identity.
And it sounds like it's rooted in perhaps self-consciousness and greater awareness of a community's perception of one's own abilities versus more of an internal locus of control. So is that what happens?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I think it's social reinforcement. I think it's self-narrative and self-dialogue. It's on the art front. It's like, did the drawing make the refrigerator or not? Did someone did you get a grade? You're like, is that an A? Did someone else recognize it? And so it starts to separate. Now it's limited to, like, say the top 10% are the ones that are going to be artists and going to go to art school, and like really now like musicians, same thing. And I think you see it now with the kids now. Like, I was listening to a story this morning on the World Cup, and one of the famous Canadian players was discovered at 11. It was like, wow, 11. I was thinking about my own daughter, who, let's be honest, was not the best soccer player on the team at 6. But I didn't care. Like, it's about, let's give her some years. But wow, 6 to 11, that's not a lot of time. So if you're discovered at 11, wow, this is the focus we're having to put our kids in so early is scary for someone like me, who just sort of stumbled through a variety of different things, and then you find your way. So just, when I talked to, we had a project at IDEO where we talked to the Stanford swim team and Stanford swim coach, and the discipline was extraordinary. It was so inspiring. But on the other hand, it was like the limited number of like experiences was narrow. It's like, this is what you will do. And it was very clear, like many of these kids were living out the parents' ambition for them. But to get to that level, you have to have self-motivation. You have to really want that too. It was a combination. But it was cool, but in a way it was also kind of scary. It's like, wow, what happened to the variety?
One of the things I was thinking about in advance of this conversation, and it's come up a couple of times now, I'm thinking about what you shared about your self-talk when you were completing a difficult athletic endeavor. And I think you noted that you actually find a variance between what you're capable of doing, your internal monologue when you're doing something you are conscious that is hard, that's a physical effort, and then maybe the rest of your life. I don't know if I'm synopsizing that correctly, but
Yeah.
that's what I was hearing. And then as we're talking about children and the stories they're hearing from other people and their internal narrative, but I've been thinking a lot about the relationship and the differences between narrative storytelling as a practice and design as a practice, which is multidisciplinary. How do you think about the relationship between story and design?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I'll actually shine a light on podcasting for this. I think podcasting is doing this awesome service for people, which is allowing them to listen in and get inputs on other people that are handling something in a really creative way, or a shared struggle, or there's just a through line. And because there's so much variety in the podcasting world, it's highly likely you can find something that's resonant with you. And so when I think about that back to design thinking, it's like the phases of design thinking go from sort of divergent to convergent. Like, you can't just stay in this like, wow, imagine these two things coming together. At some point, you got to call it. You go, these two things coming together are really interesting. Now let's make a prototype out of that. And the problem, I would say, with the podcast thing, and this is the TED problem too, we used to say, like, you get all TEDed up, right? Like, you watch a TED talk, you get all TEDed up. And then, like, what are you supposed to do? Like, you've got that energy. And so the best someone can do is be like, thumbs up, like, liked your TED talk. But I love the question, like what are we doing Monday? And what are we doing Monday really helps take something from the lofty ambition is like we're going to create a movement and we're going to get all of America healthier and we're going to, reverse diabetes or whatever it is. But then that question of like, so what are we doing Monday is key because you gotta limit that down to like, well, we're going to call Siddhartha Mukherjee, who's, someone I talked to recently. Is like, we're going to call him and ask him about what he thinks. So how do you break this down into more action? That's the issue in the world right now is we've got too much stimulus, and I suffer from this too. Is like so much stimulus, but not enough action, and the reward comes from the action.
Yeah, I think that that's a really keen observation because podcasts can just create kind of an endless loop of spectatorship, inspiration, potentially motivation around specific narratives. And then, as you noted, like how do you then shift into gear and like get out of inertia and into action? And I think sometimes hearing stories about specific topics, that is part of how people shift out of inertia. And it is, the wind in their kite foil that moves them forward. And other times it can be the thing that keeps people in stasis. So that's definitely resonant. And when you think about where you're focused now in the space of healthcare, yeah. I think the first question that I would have is, how do you define health?
Yeah, I think that I define it as strongly correlated with energy. So, and I think about that in terms of the body's ability to create energy is a pretty significant sign of good health. So that's getting really specific. That's about the what we call, say, homeostasis. Homeostasis is kind of like baseline, but within homeostasis, there's a lot of cellular interaction and the when we think about the root cause, I always like to think in design thinking, you try to like peel back the layers until you've got something that's universally true. So I'll give you a quick example. I heard a great interview. This was a Tim Ferriss interview recently, where he's talking to someone in mental health, and he goes, if you don't feed kids lunch by the afternoon, they're all falling apart. And the mental health world will say that one has block throwing disorder. This one's got talking back disorder, right? And it's like, actually, there was this kind of universal thing as a metaphor. Whereas if you fed them lunch, they all would have been fine. So the equivalent in health, which is you asked me what health was, is metabolism is key. And once the metabolism starts to go into distortion, the rest of healthcare starts to present itself. That's the root of diabetes. That's the root of hypertension. That's the root, these are all, metabolism is back to the origin. So for health, you've got to have at least homeostasis in metabolism. And ideal health is you're metabolically superior. Like your body is absolutely loving, what's going on within itself, and its cells are replenishing. And, so now you get to like, well, how would you do that? How would you get more into health optimization? Well, that gets to sleep and nutrition, of course, and social relationships. And so back to this whole like endurance sport thing, it's said that, level training at a kind of level 2 training where you can talk, but just barely, like that's supposed to be like the optimal place where cellular regeneration is happening, mitochondrial change is happening, and ultimate cell health is happening. So you're doing yourself the best possible thing you can for metabolic health. That's the optimal place to be. Now you add something else to that, which is you and I go on a ride with 10 buddies and we're all chatting the whole time. You've done 2 massive things, actually 3. 1, you went outside. That's key. And study Siddhartha Mukherjee to learn that we're all cellularly connected. And we used to, that tends to be kind of like Eastern thinking is like, oh, we're one with nature. Well, it turns out if you want to get really factual about it, you're cellularly connected. You've got 37 trillion cells. You've got this thing called your microbiome, which is all these cells that live in you. They're not yours, but they live on you. That's another few trillion. And you're interacting with the environment around you all the time and the people around you on a cellular level. So that's getting explosive right now. And if you want to reverse the valve on that, you look at the pandemic. It's like that's a lot of layer of gene activation where we've all been removed. The biggest concern right now is people getting sick from things that aren't COVID because we've all been suppressed and we haven't been interacting with our cellular environment as productively as we were before. So, mitochondria, metabolic health, and another way to talk about this is metabolic discrimination. So when we talk about health equity, put someone in a place that's noisy and there's sirens all night and they can't sleep, take them away from reasonable food, put them in really stressful relationships, and you're already metabolically discriminating. That person is going to have a metabolic issue over time. And so back to sort of root cause, you asked me what health is. Health is really healthy metabolism. And healthcare thinks about more about progression of disease. So this idea of moving upstream from there was no disease and there was no symptom, and then actually bringing healthcare into a space of improvement of health rather than deterioration of disease is a huge lifelong pursuit of mine and a lot of people.
And as you noted, technology can be an enabler of health, and there certainly have been innumerable technological advancements in the past 5 years, 10 years, 100 years as it relates to medicine and health. And on the consumer side, it's things like continuous glucose monitoring, sleep monitoring, HRV devices, heart rate monitors, power meters, whatever the case may be. Equally, the relationship that people have with technology, when I think about what you shared around our cellular connection to other people and the social ties and how they can help foster health and community.
Yeah.
How do you think about the role of technology in disrupting the natural order and the connection that people have?
Yeah, I think, well, it starts with the business models, right? So if the business model is the tech, if the tech business model is the end game in this is you need to buy something, that's going to distort the power of the tool. I think for given the fact that we're spending so much of GDP on healthcare, there is a glaring business opportunity, and I say it because business drives a lot of the U.S. economy. So if you want to make an effective business, I've often said like just get into addictions because they sell really well, and the phone just proves the latest one, just like addict people to social media, and you're gonna have a great business, and that's played itself out. So, but if there's a different end game, which means using things like social media with the incentive of health improvement, and again, some might say, well, that's how would you pay for that? Turns out you actually can pay for that because we're already spending trillions of dollars on healthcare, so we just need to direct it in that direction. So technology plays a really interesting role in all this. I'm less optimistic right now because of what we've seen out of the pandemic and social media. I was just at one of our hospital sites, and in a 140 bed hospital in their morning rounding, I heard at least 8 times suicidal ideation on this patient on floor 4, suicidal ideation on the patient on floor 5. It's like, it's so prevalent that it's just common. That's happening every day in that place. And so you got to go upstream. And when you go upstream and you think about the technologies, I think one thing we're struggling with that I think it's people like you and me and others that unite on this. Your former employer, I think, does a really interesting service here. Is how do you not use technology to just data shame people? So what I'm seeing happen with sleep monitors and glucose monitors and whatnot is it can end up being just another tool to shame people because that sleep, I can look at my sleep score every day and say like, yeah, that one still sucks. It's like, it just gives you like, I know I didn't sleep well last night. This thing told me I definitely didn't sleep well last night. And yet there's not a whole back to what are we doing Monday? How do you actually get into the mode of action forming and kind of tiny habits and working your way towards something productive? And whether it's an American thing or just a human thing, we really struggle with that feeling like it doesn't matter that much that I slept 10 more minutes last night. But that sort of mindset of accumulation of marginal gains is so big. That's such a huge insight. If you can just get these tiny things going, we just love the stories of like someone that lost 300 pounds. Like, let's talk about a quarter. That's a quarter of 1 pound. That's phenomenal. That's a huge achievement, but we just diminish all that. So how do you use technology to celebrate the accumulation of marginal gains? How do you use technology to measure new things? I think we're actually don't have the measures we really need, even with loop and glucose. It's getting better, but how do we measure metabolic health, for example? That's going to be a breakthrough.
When you think about what you've learned from the work that you've done in the healthcare space as it relates to design thinking, one of the questions that you shared, this question of what are we doing on Monday, is a really interesting one. I know it's difficult to reduce what you've done in the entirety of your career into maybe a simple set of questions, but I do wonder, are there any simple questions that you like to ask yourself that draw from this work that you apply to your own life? Are there things that you frequently ask yourself just to check in and make sure that you're in action, you're headed in the right direction, or that you are taking note of some of the marginal gains that you're seeing in areas where you want to create behavior change for yourself as you're designing your own life?
Yeah, I got a lot out of like James Clear's book on habits, and like my daughter and I, my daughter's 5, so she's got her habit tracker, and I've got mine, and you have these little boxes next to them. So um, just it's the stupidest stuff, right? As far as an adult would look at. So things like, did I organize my to-do list today? Because it's not something I was doing, and I need to introduce that right back into the fold. So it's like, check the box. Hers is like, did I put my dish in the sink? So these are so small. The rule is it has to be something that you weren't doing before, and we do them by the month. So when you look back at the month, you can see that there's a bunch of days that you missed, which is also counter American thinking or even compulsive thinking. Is like, I missed 3 days, I'm completely off the rails. It's like, no, look at the totality of the month. You did something you weren't doing 10 times. That's 10x more than you were doing last month. So being able to take inventory on that. And I'm the worst offender. I'm as bad as anybody else in terms of idealizing the thinking and it's all or nothing. That's in my personality. So just doing this kind of accumulation of marginal gains and also getting pretty creative with it. So things like integrating, there's not as much time for movement as a dad. And so you got to get creative. So I ride my daughter to school in the morning in her little trailer. And I also believe in climate. This is like, I just did this little math trick where I total the total miles and then reimburse myself as if I drove a car and invest the difference. So it's like 56 cents a mile, come back. I'm getting paid more as an athlete now than I was at Specialized because each day is about $5, right? Sorry, pre-Specialized with the original story, but invest the difference. So it's just getting creative. It's like, hey, and I use Strava to track it. So that's the math, and I used to kind of put the number of dollars listed in the Strava title. So those are just accumulation of marginal gains. Any one ride doesn't matter. You accumulate that up to a month, and now you've got a few $100, and you invest a few $100, and so there's an interesting longevity study in this. It's like I'm actually paying myself to ride my bike, and could be handsomely if the investments return. So that's just getting. I think IDEO taught me the discipline. Creativity is what's really lacking. When we think about healthcare, it's just starving for more creative solutions because it's so regulated. It's life or death. It's literally life or death. So you don't mess around. You don't move fast and break things in healthcare because people are going to die if you do that. You have to be very calculated and very thorough, but there's a lot of room for creativity even within that, especially on the behavior change side.
And when you're looking at a new problem set within the scope of the job that you're currently doing, or just generally, how do you like to step into a new space? How do you orient yourself? And how do you balance maybe curiosity with frameworks that just the typical frameworks that you're using to approach problem solving. How do you orient yourself in a space and then move forward?
Yeah, I think one is just walking in as the humble observer. I didn't go to medical school. I don't know what this oncologist is doing. So you just walk in and say, would you mind if I just observe you with your patients? And of course, you get permission to do that, and with the patient as well. And you just start observing, and you start pulling out that beginner's mind is so valuable. We really underestimate it. Is if you've been an oncologist for 25 years, you've whittled away that clean slate that once existed. So having that beginner's mind is a huge advantage. So why did you ask this? Why isn't she responding to that? What's going on with her family? Just being able to ask the naive questions and taking advantage of that beginner's mind. The other thing that helps too is just to think, if this had never existed before, if podcasts never exist before and this was the very first one, how would we do it? So just being very open to new ways of doing things. And so for healthcare, we often think, say, primary care. If primary care never existed before, and we called this everyday health, what would be your first interaction with the healthcare system? So here's an example of a reframe there. Mental health has become obviously a glaring issue, and it's not being well addressed. So why would your first foray why wouldn't it be mental health as the very first encounter? Or why do we separate our teeth, from the body? We separate the mind from the body, like, oh, mental health care you get over here, cardiology you get over here, and your teeth. Oh yeah, your teeth, you go somewhere totally different. So you're laughing and I'm laughing because it's like, somehow we came up with that model that like the teeth happen over there, mental happens over here, and your cardiologist, everything is specialized. So we just have sectioned off the body. And so then insert this thing like integrative medicine, which introduces the ideas like actually all those things come back together. Again, Mukherjee's work is like that cellular system is all communicating across your whole body, and blood is the mechanism to carry it around. It's like, wow, that's a reframe. That's a reframe. So genetics, we gave all the genetics this credit, but turns out the cell is the carrier, the protein is the activator of the gene. So you could do full genetic sequences, you can manipulate the gene, but if there's nothing for it to act on, it's like just having an idea with no forward progress. So having that, like, what if we start over? What if today was the first day this existed, is a really good way to think about it.
And if today were the first day and this were the first podcast ever, I think that you're a phenomenal guest to be that first guest on the first podcast ever. So Chris,
you're
I know
a great host.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it. I know that you've got to get moving into the rest of your day here and continuing to innovate healthcare, but thanks for joining me today. And I'm looking forward to getting back out on the race course with you soon. We'll have to talk offline. I think it's high time that we met again out there on the field.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you for doing what you're doing on the hard way and just getting these voices out in the world. I'm inspired by you and your work and the risk taking that you have endured, and just it's awesome. And please say hi to Molly and the family.
I will. Thanks for being here. Take care.
Bye-bye.
This is Andrew Vance. Thank you for listening to Choose the Hard Way. If you enjoyed this episode, there's never been a better time to share it with a friend who might dig the stories or insights that Chris shared. Wherever you listen, please subscribe, hit 5 stars, and leave a positive review. It helps more people find the show, and I really appreciate you having my 6. Sign up for the newsletter at choosethehardway.com to get the story behind these stories, episode updates, and more. Choose the Hard Way is a Big Truck production. It is produced and edited by Anthony Palmer at Palm Tree Podco. Shout out to Emily Miles for digital support. The content for this show is created by me, Andrew Vance.